welcome to the bookshelf at the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, where we look at books pertinent to South Asia. My name is Nithya Subramanian, and I'm an editor at the Institute. Today, we'll be discussing the book titled India's Saudi Policy, Bridge to the Future, with authors Professor P.R. Kumaraswamy and Dr. Muhammad Muddassir Quamar. Dr. Kumaraswamy is a professor of contemporary Middle East studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, while Dr. Quamar is an associate fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. This book comes at an opportune time when the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, has seen many changes, especially with respect to its foreign policy. So we are very glad to have you both scholars with us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
I'd like to start off by asking you the very elementary question: what prompted you to write this book, and how did the two of you collaborate?
You know, about 10 years ago, Muddassir came to start his PhD program, and he wanted to work on Saudi Arabia, a country which is of great importance to India. You know, he was discussing a lot of issues. So I said, Arab world is important. Given his expertise in Arabic language, I think we decided that Saudi Arabia is a great country to work with. He was working on the Saudi domestic politics. While we were pursuing the research, it occurred to both of us that, you know, there is not enough discussion on the India's relation with such an important country. And there were references here and there. There were occasional chapters, maybe in edited volumes and articles, and sometimes people discuss within the broader Gulf policy. But an independent treatment of the bilateral relations was not there. So I said, let's start an article, research article. And gradually it became a monograph. And before we could actually recognize, it ended up as a book. I think that is what and it took us about, the whole interest was pretty long. And this is a gradual evolution. We said we tried to at least do our bit to bridge the gap.
Dr. Muddassir, you would like to add to that?
I think what Sir has said, I would agree with that. So when I started looking at Saudi Arabia with my interest in domestic issues, and then I started also looking at India's relations with Saudi Arabia, most of the time what we found was that Saudi Arabia comes as part of the larger, discussion on India-Gulf relations. Given that it is such an important country, there was a lack of literature. And we kept discussing these issues. We kept trying to find out more. And, gradually, as I was saying, gradually one thing led to another. And eventually it turned out that, we had a monograph, and then we kind of fine-tuned it and, got a book. So that's how it happened.
Okay. So, just coming back to the India-Saudi relations, what were the reasons for India's prolonged neglect of such an important neighbor?
Yeah, true. Actually, if you look at historically, India established diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia soon after independence. In 1950, we had established diplomatic relations. And in the beginning, there were some efforts to kind of develop bilateral ties. We had, high-level political exchange of visits. But then things really, both countries, if you look at both countries' foreign policies, there is a divergence that happened. And they kind of went in different directions. From the Indian point of view, I will say there are two very important factors. One is the ideological, leaning in Indian foreign policy that was quite pervasive. That is one very important factor. The second factor is, I think, the way India looked at Saudi Arabia from the Islamic prism and the Pakistan prism. Yes. That also, I think, in a very significant way contributed to the neglect, from as far as India is concerned. So I think these two are very important factors.
Yes, and talking of Pakistan, your book takes a very deep look at the Pakistan factor, which has played a very critical role in India's relations with Saudi Arabia. But you also mentioned that a critical shift took place once India delinked Pakistan from its dealings with Saudi Arabia. So how would you assess India's relations with Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis the present relationship of Pakistan with it?
You know, if you look at the Indian foreign policy in general, a Western diplomat described Pakistan as India's center of gravity.
Yes, yes.
So we looked at the world only to the Pakistani prism, which was very valid even for Saudi Arabia. We couldn't get out of that. We are looking at the entire world through the Pakistani prism, and it applies to Saudi Arabia also. But you know, if you look at the 1990s, the end of the Cold War, India's economic reform, a great power aspiration, put a very simple challenge to India. Do you want to be a South Asian power or you want to be an Asian power? But you cannot be an Asian power while constantly competing with Pakistan. I think that was the time around somewhere in 2001, early January 2001, when the Indian foreign minister made the first visit to Saudi Arabia, Jaswant Singh's one, that is where the departure took place. Pakistan is important only in the bilateral sense, but not as a factor in India's overall foreign policy. You are no longer putting a country at a fix whether you have to choose between me or Pakistan. And that was very visible in the Saudi context. So the moment Pakistan was out of the table, it became easier for Saudi Arabia to deal with India. And if you look at some of the Saudi leaders and individuals, they always describe India as a friend, Pakistan as a brother. You know, you're familiar with Indian epics. I would rather be a friend than a brother, because friend is an informed choice. Brother is something given to you. There is nothing you can do about it. So if Saudi Arabia is choosing me as a friend, that is more enduring. So if you look at in the last 20 years, that is what's happening. So India is able to deal with Saudi Arabia independent of Pakistan. In the same way, Saudi Arabia is able to deal with India independent of Pakistan. Just an example, between 2014, when he became the Prime Minister, till today, Prime Minister Modi has met the Saudi leaders 8 times.
Okay.
Often in the G20 summits, but also on a bilateral level. This is something which never happened. So if you look at all of them, you have a greater engagement with Saudi Arabia merely because Pakistan is not on the table. Now, Pakistan has its own individual problems with Saudi Arabia. That is nothing to do with India. And I think that is what it is. So if you look at it, Pakistan figures very rarely in India's dealings with Saudi Arabia, which also makes Saudi Arabia easy to deal with India. And I think that is what one should look at it. So, you know, if you look at the overall thing, the 2001 visit, incidentally, that was the first time a foreign minister of India went to Saudi Arabia. And that was a turning point. And I would say that we didn't look back after that.
So moving on to another interesting point in your book, you've devoted a large section to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And you've mentioned that the OIC had been functioning as a handmaiden of Pakistan. But recently, we saw Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi threatening withdrawal from the organization if Saudi didn't pay attention to the Kashmir issue. And then, of course, soon after, we also saw General Bajwa dashing off to the kingdom. So what are your views on the position and role of the OIC now and its views on Kashmir? Do you think that Pakistan is trying to create an alternate Muslim grouping?
I think that's a very kind of valid point which you have raised. It's true, we have, because when we were looking at the bilateral relations and India's policy, one of the issues we identified as a prominent factor in the relationship is Islam. And we know that in the larger Middle East, in the larger Islamic world, Pan-Islamism has played a very significant role in shaping the, not only the politics of these countries, but the larger geopolitics and obviously domestic politics as well. If you look at, for example, Pakistan, historically, Pakistan has also used Pan-Islamism as a tool in its foreign policy, and so have other countries. Even Saudi Arabia or other countries in the region. And OIC in that sense has played as a platform to kind of promote that pan-Islamism in their foreign policy. And this was working quite well. I mean, till pan-Islamism was a dominant foreign policy factor, it was working out quite well. A number of times, Kashmir, continued to be discussed at OIC platforms. For Pakistan in 1994, due to Pakistani initiative, a special forum on Kashmir was formed within the OIC, and it continued to be used. But if you look at it in recent times, in parallel to India's changing dynamics is India's relations with the Gulf countries, specifically Saudi Arabia, there is a shift in OIC as well. So, for example, if you look at Saudi Arabia, pan-Islamism, it remains a factor, but it is not the dominant factor anymore. And it uses it more as a soft power than actually, realpolitik, factor. So the same cannot be said. The same can be said about UAE also, but not with Pakistan. The shift which has come in Saudi policy or Emirati policy cannot be seen in the same way in Pakistan. So Pakistan wishes to use OIC the same way it used to happen in the past. I think that is a dilemma as far as Pakistani foreign policy is concerned. As far as OIC's attitude towards India is concerned, I think there is a change. There is a subtle change, both in terms of how OIC is looking at its own mandate. Earlier, it was more of a very political organization. Nowadays, if you look at OIC, summit meeting minutes and everything, there's lots of discussion on developmental issues, on education, on issues related to economic connectivity, and so on. There is less discussion on the political issues because there is a realization that what you need is to create opportunities for the people of these countries. And if you look at it, for example, last year, India was invited as a guest of honor in the foreign ministers meeting of OIC. So there is at the political level also, there is some shift. I think that is something which is not, which is difficult for Pakistan to adjust to. Pakistan doesn't want to kind of adjust to that kind of a situation. And I think Pakistan has also found a very good ally in Turkey, or let me say in Erdogan actually. And that also perhaps the point which you were earlier raising about whether Pakistan and is trying to draw a parallel kind of pan-Islamist organization. I wouldn't say they are doing it, but they certainly want to challenge. I mean, from there's Turkey is there. I think Turkey, from the Turkish point of view, from Erdogan's point of view, it's a question of ideological leaning in your foreign policy. Then you have Iran and Qatar, who also have joined kind of hands. But in my understanding, the way I understand Middle East, I would say it's more of not an ideological decision. It's more of a realist decision in the sense that you want to challenge Saudi Arabia at this moment, but perhaps things can change. And then you had Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia who had joined, but we know what exactly happened. I mean, how things panned out, and as you were saying, General Bajwa went to Riyadh, but then he wasn't even given an audience with the Crown Prince. So I would take that with a lot of in a very cautious manner, and I wouldn't give it a lot of importance actually.
So we'll move on to the economic relations with Saudi Arabia. You've mentioned in the book that we need to strengthen economic relations beyond trade and energy imports, and it should involve two-way investments, upstream projects in Saudi Arabia, downstream ones in India. So what are your thoughts on the state of the economic engagement between the two countries? We did hear the Saudi Aramco deal last year, but then after that, we haven't seen any substantial investments coming. So what is your view on the economic relationship?
Yeah, I mean, if I can look at the overall economic relations, I would say that it is in a very healthy kind of situation. Saudi Arabia is among the top 5 largest trading partners of India. Saudi Arabia is among the top energy suppliers for India. From the Saudi point of view also, if you look at it, India is among the top countries as far as both energy exports are concerned or bilateral trade relations are concerned. So I would say, as far as bilateral trade is concerned, it is in a very strong position. But that there are certainly opportunities for growth, and I think gradually things will take further improve. Now, as far as investment issue is concerned, certainly there is an intent, and there are opportunities. There is no doubt about it. Some of the things have taken place. For example, we know how when the Crown Prince visited India, he announced that there would be 100 billion investment in India. But true, it has been slow. The process has been slow. I would say there are certain structural problems. We know the problem as far as issue of foreign investments in India is concerned. There are structural issues. There are structural issues with regard to Saudi Arabia as well, because of the disruptions caused by the oil market, international oil market, and that also kind of leads to fluctuation in Saudi ability to invest outside, within and also, and obviously outside as well. And then the current disruption caused by the COVID-19. So all the entire global economy is struggling. So I think there is a intent which is very much there. And if you talk to, for example, Saudi officials or Indian officials, they would say that things are progressing. But certainly as analysts, if we look at it, things have been slow, and there are both structural factors responsible for it, and there are disruptions caused by factors which are variables which are not permanent in that sense. So I think both needs to be addressed if one wishes to see further improvement in economic relations.
Yes, we are also in election season. The US is in election season, but your book also talks about the American influence in the Gulf region. So at a time when there's a dwindling American influence in the Gulf region, but there is increasing political convergence and understanding between New Delhi and Washington, how do you think India should navigate this shift?
The convergence of interest comes at a very interesting times. In the last 2 decades, India is getting closer to United States on the political realm, both in the region and beyond. At the same time, the American interest and influence in the Gulf is receding. And if you look at, partly because of the 2 Gulf wars, the Iraq and the Afghanistan after 9/11, and the American domestic pressure, and the American inability to satisfy everybody anybody and everybody in the region. If you look at it, when Obama left office, nobody was happy with American policy. And they had a nuclear deal, which Iran was happy, Europeans were happy, the entire Middle East was unhappy. So when Trump came into picture, now the situation has changed. But still, if you look at it, the American influence in the region is on decline. And they are not able or willing to solve the GCC crisis, for instance. It is going on for the last 3 years, but both sides are friends of the United States, but still they are not able to resolve it. So the US decline in terms of influence is very visible. At the same time, you see other countries are also taking a greater interest in the region. China is very active, BRI and others. Russia is also interested in at least some of the countries. So India's growing interest in the Gulf comes at a time when the US is not the leading influence in the region. which basically means you cannot piggyback on the United States, or the bandwagoning is not possible. You need to do it yourself, which means two things. One, you need to increase the political contact with the region. And I think that is one of the interesting things since Modi came into picture. The kind of political engagement has enormously changed. If you look at the entire region, India never had such an engagement, even during the times of Jawaharlal Nehru. When Nehru stand, as Muddassir was saying earlier, India's Middle East policy was largely Cairo-centric. So therefore, you antagonize quite a lot of people. But today, it is economy-centric. It's not any individual country, and that is where Saudi Arabia comes into more prominent place. The second thing is, merely having a political relation is not enough. You need to back it up with economic component. I think if you look at it, that is one thing India had to learn from Chinese example. Probably Muddassir will tell greater detail again. But the issue is, your political engagement will be useless unless India is increasing the economic relations with the region. Not in terms of trade, but also in terms of joint venture, in terms of cooperation, not only bilaterally, but also multilaterally in third countries. I think that is going to be a real challenge. Simply put, you need to increase your political engagement and give an economic component to the relationship. That is the only way India can have an influence in the Gulf region when the US is receding, and India will have to do in competition with China. That's going to be a key factor. You cannot do it on your own. You need to compete with others. Russia has a role, but Russian influence is mostly on the west, on the Syrian front, but you don't see it in the Gulf front. Therefore, for United States, the Indo-Pacific is more interesting than the Gulf.
Yeah, I think I would take it, continue on the point that, if you look at the US focus right now, it's no longer Gulf, it's no longer Persian Gulf. That has shifted to Indo-Pacific. A lot of, things are moving in the direction of bringing different countries together in the Indo-Pacific to try and if not counter, curtail kind of China's expansion in the region. So I think that is something which is very much happening. And from the Indian point of view, even though this area is it's not as if it is not important, but the Gulf is extremely important, more so for economic factors. I mean, apart from the fact that we have so many things already there, I mean, if we'll talk about energy issues, or if we talk about the expatriates and remittances and all the things which we know, apart from that, if India really needs to kind of enhance its influence in the region and beyond, that Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia, they provide a very unique opportunity. And there is certainly, I would say this is a very good time actually, because there is a political understanding, I won't say convergence, but the level of political understanding is completely unprecedented at this stage. And I think this is the time when you can use this to take it forward, to kind of, have, as Sir was mentioning, have, investment in different countries, not just bilaterally, even at the third country, in the region and in, beyond. So I think certainly this is an important aspect, and India has to kind of, I would say, grab this opportunity.
Okay, Professor Kumaraswamy also mentioned about China and its growing influence in the region. So how do you think China would affect India's relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, that is true. Actually, I would look at it in a way, not in terms of a trilateral, kind of relationship. I will look at it in a bilateral, way. China is a competition as far as India and Gulf is concerned. And China has certain advantages which India does not have. For example, the ability to take quick decisions, and then the efficiency with which China can implement its decisions, kind of complete a project, or bring labor, complete the project, then go back, and so forth. But India too has certain advantages. As I was mentioning earlier, there is the kind of political understanding which is there. It is unprecedented, and that is something which is very important. The other issue is we have traditionally, in the sense, economic relations have flourished. There is a huge expatriate community in the Gulf countries. So there are immense opportunities. And India has that kind of an advantage. Certainly, China is a competition. China will be a factor. But in my opinion, it directly does not, at least at this stage, in the current stage, does not directly affect India's relationship with Saudi Arabia. In future, if, given the kind of relation, the geopolitics, how it evolves, the kind of world order, that evolves, we are seeing some, movement in directions of larger geopolitical competition between US and China. One doesn't really know how it will, pan out eventually, but the likelihood of, China trying to be more aggressive, if that happens, then it can affect, India's relations. And India will have to be, even though this is not currently the situation, India will have to be prepared to, kind of tackle that kind of an eventuality. And that will only happen if you utilize the economic opportunities, if you build on the political, kind of, which is already there, that foundation, if you build on that and make use of these opportunities and, enhance your influence.
Yes, and finally, my last question to you is on that is your book. Is that your book has suggested that besides enhancing the bilateral relations, the focus should also be on Islamic dimensions of the ties, and this would, result in gains. So, could you please elaborate on this point?
Now, if you look at Saudi Arabia, you can separate Pakistan. You can't separate Islam. Islam will be an integral to the relationship. But there is an interesting shift we have to do is, earlier, Saudi Arabia was perceived only to the Islamic prism. And that is why if you look at it, the absence of a scholarship on Saudi Arabia is primarily because of that. Okay, it's a Muslim subject, only Muslims should study. And I think that is how it has been dealt with. You will find very few non-Muslims who are actually interested in this subject. And that is what, But now, if you look at in the last 20 years, it is not, you are looking at Saudi Arabia not through an Islamic prism, but through national interest, through energy security, through greater partnership. So Saudi Arabia is going to be an important player in India's economic ascendance. Your perception of Saudi Arabia is different, something else. With the result, what will happen is that at the same time, Islam is going to be an important component. You cannot ignore that. What we are suggesting is, instead of looking at Saudi Arabia through an Islamic prism, look at Saudi Arabia through the national interest prism, and in that context, Islam will be an additional advantage. So rather than putting Islam on the front, you take all the other issues, Islam will be there, which can be an additional advantage for us. The reason is simple. Islam is Indian. It came to India 13 centuries ago. And therefore, we are the second largest Islamic country in the world. And we have all the denominations of Islam. And therefore, rather than seeing it as a liability or an outside something, you can use it as a strength. And that is what it is. India's, if you look at it, so Indonesia is there, but Indonesian Islam is probably more or less unidimensional. But if you look at an Indian context, it's a completely diverse.
Yes.
And the other advantage we have got is, if you look at all the great powers, none of the countries can use Islam for the foreign policy promotion. China cannot do it because it is a liability. The moment you mention Islam, it becomes a problematic. Russia cannot use it. At least United States cannot use it as long as Trump is in office. I don't know what happens after November, he cannot use it. If you look at all these great powers, the moment Islam is a liability for them when it comes to foreign policy dealings, which is not the case in India. And therefore, so the idea is simple. Instead of looking at Saudi Arabia through an Islamic prism, look at Saudi Arabia through a more holistic approach. In that context, Islam will be an asset. I think that is what we are saying. So Islam will be there, but how do you prioritize it? How do you use it? Because if you look at Saudi Arabia through an Islamic prism, then, bulk of India will not be interested in that.
Right.
Completely. It will be only Hajj and Islam and other. But if you look at Saudi Arabia, it's an important partner in India's, suppose, Prime Minister is talking about 5 trillion. Okay, we may not get in the time frame he's talking about thanks to COVID. We may get there maybe a little later. But to do that, you need a country like Saudi Arabia on your side. And therefore, you are going to look at Saudi Arabia through an economic developmental prism. In that context, Islam will become additional incentive for you. It's more like a bonus. Previously, that was your prime focus. What we are saying is, take it as a bonus. You do other things, this will automatically get you more closer to you. And I think that is one thing. So you can separate Pakistan from Indo-Saudi relations, but you cannot separate Islam from that reason. All we are saying is, change the priority. If you change the priority, Islam will be a great asset for India in getting closer to Saudi Arabia, getting closer to Saudi Arabia in the context of your developmental agenda. It is not like in the Pakistani context of pan-Islamism. No, your agenda is different. Yours is an economic developmental agenda. In that context, Islam will be an asset. For Saudi Arabia also, it's a good thing. Because Saudi Arabia are trying to reform internally. It needs a stable, reliable, external partner and a friend. So India can present itself as a friend. The substantial Muslim population will be seen by Saudi Arabia, can say, okay, the second largest Muslim country is my friend. So it serves both the countries. So Saudi Arabia can look to India for developmental position. India can look to Saudi Arabia for a developmental agenda. For both the countries, Islam could be an added strength. That is what we are suggesting.
That's a very interesting point to end our discussion with. So thank you for joining us on Bookshelf today, and we hope to speak to you again sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.